Okay, I can give you a little overview of like what that all is, like why we decided to do this. So in the 10 years ago, I was in Boston, and there was a monthly meeting at the data center at MIT, which is where, you know, the W3C sort of has their see me home. And every month they would meet in the evening, and there would be always 2 talks, and basically then later on there would be cheese and some drinks, and there would be approximately between 50 and 100 people who would attend these monthly meetings. And from time to time there was no speaker, and they had this proposal to say, oh, okay, instead of not having the meeting, let's just meet and see where it goes. And at this occasion, I have learned that sometimes it's hard to start a discussion out of nowhere, but some of the most inspiring discussions I've ever attended happened due to this circumstance at that particular meeting, because people met and they were co-curious in a particular topic. In this particular case, it was called the semantic web gathering. So they were all interested in the semantic web. So in this case, they're all interested in cultural data analysis. And the sort of exploring part of the curation typically happens when we invite speakers who we think are particularly fitting and should actually tell us something, like, you know, the demo series project, or you know, in the case of Peter Dodds last week, and the US election happening, and obviously there is some interesting thing cooking in terms of research, so we actually would like to learn more about it. So we'd like to do this a number of times. It shouldn't happen every week, it should not happen too densely, but every 6 or 8 weeks maybe we should do this. But obviously this is an experiment. It also fulfills another purpose, which actually my colleague, former colleague and friend Sune Lehmann at DTU Copenhagen tweeted out 2 days ago by coincidence. He said, one of the weird problems right now we have is that we don't hang out in conferences, and as such, what we cannot do is we cannot have informal meetings and casual conversations about the science we do. And also these kind of like connections where, you know, we learn each other, like how we think, and then basically have these super long lasting, on the PhD and postdoc level at least, super long lasting typical friendships going on that last for entire careers. And so then the question is obviously, how can we deal with that? One of the problems Sune lines out in a blog post is that one problem is that in large conferences, obviously you have the kind of large group interaction, like somebody gives a talk and like 50 to 500 people listen to it. So in a similar way, if you do the regular talk thing, there's a talk and then there is an audience and then there is some discussion about the talk. But this kind of casual, like bringing up topics is not so easily possible. So what should be done is actually sort of opportunities for interaction like this one, but also in other groups, like at demo series, like at DTU Copenhagen, like in other universities, where some of us sort of like have things on the radar, right? Like some of us have particular subtopics and I want to talk to particular other people. And so in order to enable this, we need to do more stuff like this. And it should ideally be in a way that senior people are sort of present. So, you know, to give you some input, like Kai will give you in a second. But at the same time, it is also the moment to actually come up with your own kind of topics and discussions. And it could be like, don't be shy. The questions could be stupid. Like, how do you define culture? That's a good question. Or should we define culture? That's another good question. The question is which one is stupid or not. Maybe both of them are not stupid at all. How do we deal with culture and so on? So I encourage you to have that kind of open discussion, and I will stop my monologue and we'll try to only be the moderator and only inject things when nothing else happens. So I had a kind of At the beginning, when not everybody was there, Kai introduced herself with, "Hey Max, I have an idea and I would like to present that to everybody, and I have to leave after an hour. So I think we should give Kai the first slot." And also one of her biggest fans, Nikita Vukanov, who has attended almost every meeting the last 5 weeks. He has 7 slides. And thank you very much. So you will be next. And then after that, we will be either open for new topics or we pick up a topic from one of your things. And with that, I would like to invite Kai to sort of share her screen, and I can see there's 3 slides going on, 2 of them Laura Dins. So let's see where it goes.
Okay, so hello, I am Kai Patta from Tallinn University, School of Digital Technologies, and I want to share one model that we have developed some years ago, but that is not yet validated through algorithms and through real data. But I would very much love to do it in different kind of experiments. Therefore, I want to show it, and with my mind, it relates with another topic that I also want to share one slide, that is repurposing cultural data. So in my mind, these things are connected. Originally, I am a biologist, and my favorite concept in biology is a niche concept that has inspired me quite a lot. So basically, let me see how I can make it bigger. This model that I want to share with you is a model that we developed together with a colleague, Emanuele Bardone, that I happened to meet first. I found his things, then I went to meet with him in Italy, and then he came to be a postdoc in Tallinn University, and he's currently working in Tartu University. And so just about this model, here you can see a lot of circles. In this model, I try to explain how cultural cognition happens as a distributed cognition. And here are 2 circles. One circle, that is this bigger one, is a circle that describes collective distributed cognition. What this distributed means here is not that the artifacts are distributed only, but that your cognition is partly external from you and is mediated by people, by artifacts, by culture, by cognitive niches that you create, and by cultural niches that are there in the outside. So basically, the one big circle is about collective distributed cognition, and the other circle is about epistemic distributed cognition. That is that part that happens within a specific agent. Let's imagine a person as this agent. So what the model is explaining is that what happens when you are experiencing culture, and this experiencing can happen in very different situations. For example, let's take this case that I'm supervising on the work of Tonina, that is about how to do a digital learning environment to teach culture, to teach art culture, to teach different kind of art experiences. So first thing what usually should happen is that we should be aware of something that exists at the cultural level. Some of these things that exist at the cultural level are tangible artifacts, like there could be paintings, for example. Some of the things are more like patterns like solutions to the problems that in my mind they are like niches, And niche is not only like using this word as a metaphor, but they are niches of that can be imagined like a vectorial niches as well. That there are some dimensions of the culture that culture is a multi-dimensional space for me. And let's, for example, if we have a painting, Impressionism, this is a subset of this vectorial space that can be described.
Your own topic on see aasta või noh, see eesmärk.
Okay, so basically what this model describes is that if I am a person who wants to study art, I should be aware of this culture, what kind of things are there. And then it's about the conception of an art school. Let's imagine that I want to teach copying art, that people could do exactly these phases and steps that a similar copy of art object will come out. So I need the awareness, and how this awareness usually is provided is an issue that, okay, I can go to the museums and look what items there are or in the internet, or I may be some ways mediated this patterns of culture, for example, impressionist pattern, through technical systems like CUDAN is trying to do, like filtering some pictures. And then is also the question, what happens next, how I become aware, whether I am recommended something and my perspective to the niche is narrowed, or whether I am some ways shown all kinds of areas in this cultural niche, and it's up to me to decide. So this visualization of niche some ways is needed, that I become aware what kind of art I can do. And then let's imagine I am not able to copy it myself and is copying my idea at all. Maybe I want to do something that takes this idea of impressionist pattern and appropriate to my work, but maybe I'm not able. Then I need some kind of mediation, some kind of teacher who teaches me, or system that teaches me. There is some scaffolding needed. And how this, what the scaffolding is doing, it appropriates me to this cultural niche or to this cultural pattern. Or it may be that this impressionism is not the pattern that solves my problem. Maybe I have a need to do activism art or some kind of other type of art. And I can use some parts of that is in the culture. But I need to go and tinker with this part something new. And what usually happens then is that I have to do several iterations of discovery, and without thinking of it, like doing some reflection, without trying it several times, I will not discover those cognitive patterns that fit actually with my needs, with my goal, with the situation that I am. Okay, I do this repetitive trying. That is a kind of validation for myself. In one point, I start noticing I have a new pattern, and I want to share this new pattern. So if this part is this my distributed cognitive part, then I need actually to submit it back to the world. So the world may be very broad. I can put it somewhere in the exhibition or in some portal. And what may happen there? There too, whether this cultural niche picks my pattern up or not is the question. And how I can ensure that it is picked up. Technically, it can be that it's like a self-organized system. I send there my things. If people notice, they will like them, or they endorse me, or they start using it. And some kind of aggregational mechanisms and validation mechanisms should help that my pattern becomes visible within the culture and taken into this cultural niche. The other is that not always we have this kind of technically mediated system. Very often we have people, groups in between here that have to agree, have to come to the common ground, whether this or that is beautiful what I do, or evokes action, or is about our beliefs or whatever. And again, it is a validation pattern, but it's a bit different, like in a collaborative group type of environment. Usually what has to happen then is some kind of a stabilization of this within the cultural niche, what I am offering. And then very often what is done is that these new things, they are normalized as patterns. So in the beginning, there is some need that some features are brought out, or some conceptual idea is brought out, what this pattern is doing, to whom it is good, why it is good, what are the possible ways of using it. So let's imagine that there was this impressionist pattern, and I did a new way of using impressionist pattern in making what I could make some digitally enhanced activities. And then it comes into this pool of cultural patterns, and other people can use it. So such a model, I think that it's very useful of thinking, for example, art school in different ways. For example, in some art schools, copying is very important. Sometimes scaffolding, how you mediate the art, is important. Sometimes it is very important to filter this new type of these patterns to the people. What else is important? Very important is this part when you are tinkering and finding a new pattern, how they go to the pool and what happens then. So I see here a lot of interesting aspects that could be created. And what was very interesting to me, I started, you see that these papers I did some years ago, I haven't had a good, like a technical team who could work on that. But now that CUDAN was created, I started to look what is done in the technically in the cultural cognition area, and I found one very good, nice paper. What happened? Okay, I don't go in depth into this paper, but I see that I was like a very wow surprised. It's exactly the model that we did some years ago, but it is using those technical agents. So basically here, this belief space, on my opinion, is this big cultural cognition area, cultural niche area. And what happens here, it's this epistemic distributed cognition area that is divided into more like action part, what happens, and then this cognitive part that so I think that it would be very cool and interesting to use such a thing with you as part of maybe Antonina's work or some other cases. For example, in here, I can imagine that these patterns that we search, these may be very different things. For example, values, morality is also a kind of patterns that can be excavated from texts, from Instagram pictures, from social media, and then to test out such a model again. So this was my message. And there is one little part of this message too that I would like to come to. I'm just sharing one schema from So we are very interested in the School of Digital Technologies in design and interaction of different services for learning. And what exists currently in Tallinn University, we are looking some possibility how to repurpose cultural data for interaction in the learning materials, in informal learning materials and in the formal learning materials. First of all, okay, just a big picture that we have a lot of cultural heritage databases that preserve things, but there are issues. For example, what are the issues? The data are not very good. The metadata about these cultural objects do not help to pull out or filter the objects so easily. And plus, these APIs are not very good. Then the next thing is that we need some kind of filtering and recommending and visualization that CUDAN is possibly doing. And then it comes to where we want to use those data. So where we want to use those data, for example, for storytelling in outdoor space, we have a tool. We have several tools actually. That one of those is called Smart Zoos, where we can embed the questions. And together with the questions, we should actually pull this cultural content in so that the question relates, or action in this outdoor space relates with the cultural content. Currently, there are a lot of issues, technical issues, why this cannot be done. But we have two tools. One is this outdoor trace, Smart Zoos, where we can add the content and we can explore how people start to interact with the content, or with the visualized content or filtered content. But and another tool that we have in hand is Estonia has a very big repository of learning materials, and this is called eSchool Bag. So in eSchool Bag, the conception is that we create a lot of interactive learning materials for students, and why not some of those should integrate actually cultural content more interestingly ways than just putting their picture inside. In our department that is on top of you on the third floor, we have a team of developers as well, and in our hands is this interactive learning materials templates. What we looked there is, in principle, there are such templates where, okay, my materials, where you can create a template that eats cultural content. And we are looking for such projects. Currently, we not very actively, but we want to have such projects where we can work with repurposing this cultural content for the learning purposes. For example, through, okay, here is, okay, so basically when you want to create a new material, so what it does is it asks what type of content you want to put here. And let's imagine that we want something that is video-based or art-based. Then there are templates, and in our hands, in our developers' hands, is to add here some templates that eat something that comes from the cultural data. So that would be all from my side. If you have questions, then please.
Thank you very much. So maybe we should start with your model, and I would like to fan this out and just add a number of directions that come to mind that we have also talked about before. So here in Estonia, a person that comes to mind who is sort of one of the roots of the word environment and also ecology, which is Uxküll, who drew also the first feedback loop with a cognitive sub-feedback loop, which is obviously related to this. In this thing here in CUDAN, we talk a lot about the optimality of certain things, like Pareto optimality, which is also something that's discussed in ecological niches, right? Then there's this whole other way to look at niches, which is, okay, where can a cheetah or a human or a mouse actually live geographically, which is a different way, which is also interesting. Then we talk also a lot about multidimensional space, and Pia Tika already talked about cognition. So there's many different directions this can go, and I just enumerated them because you may actually have you may take it one way or another. So I think one interesting question we can have is like, what is, how do we understand niche? What does it mean, in essence, right? Also, in addition to what you said. So yeah, so how should we proceed? Should we?
Can I say a
yes.
few words about how I understand the niches?
Sure.
So niche is not just a little place in the forest where certain kind of animals are feeling good.
Yeah.
Niche is a very abstract concept. The abstraction is in that if to understand niche, you need to think of the system level. A niche appears at the system level and the agents. So every agent is not exactly the same. Agents have a variety, but this variety at a more bigger level can be described like that they are similar. And this similarity that at agent level comes feeds to the niche through the needs that these similar agents have. So basically, niche is the fitness place for similar agents. Mm-hmm. For example, we humans have a fitness space in which we need certain kind of temperature, certain possibility to interact with other people, and so for several like factors that are important, that we feel good and we feel fit in our niche. Mm-hmm. So niche is some ways like a abstraction of needs.
Mm. So, but then also for clarity, that means that the fitness place for similar agents, that place is a multidimensional place, isn't it?
Yes. So per se, niche is a multidimensional vector space. And when you as one agent want to be fit there, of course, you have to be like a certain kind of areas in this vector space have to fit with your needs. But it's like a niche is also a dynamic space, because at the same time, the environment around these agents is in the change, and it changes through the response that the agents have to the environment. So the agents, they create the niche, and the niche helps the agents to be fit in this certain time moment. But in the next time moments, the niche may be a bit different. So culture is a kind of like a dynamic niche that we contribute, we create, and use it.
Sylvie has raised her hand.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Kai. Is it your first name?
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering about your drawing, yours, the first one, because you have 3 circles, and I was wondering if you had considered to have the 3rd circle in contact with the first one, as there seems to be interactions between the 3rd one and the first one. And I was also wondering about the sizes, because there is a big one, a smaller one, and then an even smaller one. So I think I understand why you chose that, but could you explain?
Okay, so maybe I have to come back to how this thing came to be some ways. In the beginning, I had quite a lot of around this cultural niche, and my friend, vice versa, he was working very much in this cognitive niche. So this it's some ways like very difficult to show how the agent who is actually within this cultural niche interacts with it, like visually how I can show this interaction. So it's just our way of showing one bigger, because the culture is more like overwhelming, and the other is within it. And actually this stabilization of cognitive niches, we was working very much with the affordance concept. Affordance is something that is not a functionality. Affordance is how we interact with the environment, and some part of environment extends it to us, and what extends to us from the environment depends on our embeddedness to the culture, our goals, our previous experiences. So affordance is very like dynamic thing that never you know what affords actually in the environment to you. So I would say here is this affordance part, that how it cognitively may happen. And I would say this was something like that we also wanted to show some like how there is some kind of repetition needed, that some of the patterns become stronger, that they need to be constantly fed, otherwise they die.
Can I?
Anders, yes.
Can I ask, yes. So this is one of these things with interdisciplinary science, that there's always one person in the room who doesn't understand what's going on. So that's me this time. I'm not quite sure I follow. So is this meant to be a prescriptive model or a descriptive model? I mean, is it something you imagine, you know, I tried to look up the papers you cited. Is it something you imagine like ecosystems should be like, or learning should be like as a prescriptive thing? Or is it like something you have already tested and it's more like a descriptive model of what you already found?
It's, as I said in the beginning, it hasn't been tested out with a big number of data. It has been tested out with qualitative data sets. For example, in Learning Layers project, we had here in the patterns, we used practices as patterns. And we have like qualitatively, it is some ways validated, but not quantitatively with this model that I showed, like this cognitive evolution, optimization algorithm, or things like that. It's not validated. I would very much love to validate it.
But this is about making causal claims between these things like tinkering and repetition and validation. So it's basically a picture of your kind of hypothesis base, that you're saying there should be a connection of like tinkering feeds into repetition.
Yes, that for me, what is in the very center of this model is validation. validation is the most important act in many of those. And what I am interested in is how you perceive a culture. So how you actually know that some patterns are there. That is very interesting for me. The other what is interesting, that is like pragmatically interesting, is how you mediate this culture with the aid of some kind of teaching aid, either just technically or with a human in between here. That is also one thing that always comes back when we build learning systems.
Mark?
So I have the niche construction and so on. I find it really interesting, and I will deal with it one way or another theoretically. But about this model again. So I was wondering how this. So I can imagine this kind of thing more. There's a circle, let's say, for individual, group, and population, or something along that line. So how does like that, or like individuals and institutions and like populations? So how does this kind of gradient play with your model and idea?
So basically, for me, there is no difference what is in this big cultural niche. It can be organizational cultural niche. It can be some group that has certain kind of patterns and identity. Or it can be very broadly the culture. The other is that within this model, you notice that I used like a collaboration concept and also this kind of aggregated co-creation. So they are very much different. That one is that something is aggregated into the system, and technically something is like filtered and put on top through social technical actions that people are doing with this content with some functionalities. The other is the real grounding-based group work. In our earlier projects, we have validated these different options, like especially this, what happens when you have the group work and what happens when you have just this kind of aggregation without the group goals in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's, for me, it's such a model that everything what I start to see some ways through this model. And it has helped me quite a lot. Maybe it's a stupid, very simplified model, but yeah, this niche was really like something very super interesting concept for me.
I understand that the different levels are like isomorphic, and you can apply it to like brain as well as culture, and that's part of the beauty of this. That's what the systemic theory comes in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyone who is interested to talk further about it or have some case or make use of some of it, I would very much like to try out something. I don't have technical skills myself to do it, but I can help with the intellectual part.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add something. There's a number of, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there is something like what was behind my vision for CUDAN, which I sort of tweeted out as a picture, and that sort of served as a kind of guideline of who to hire. There's one thing in the background which is sort of a far extending goal. Like once we have embedded stuff into multidimensional vector space, one of the interesting things you can ask is like, what's the shape of the data, right? Like the multidimensional shape of the data, and how does it evolve? And obviously, like for example, you have the Cathedral of Rouen, which has been painted by many painters. Many impressionists have done it more than once in different lighting conditions. There's Warhol, there's Lichtenstein, and so on. There's people who've taken pictures of it. So you can imagine every depiction of the cathedral is sort of like a shape in that multidimensional space, right? And so, yes. Long story short, at the end, you can ask yourself, how can we actually capture the evolution of that multidimensional space? And so, Manfred Eigen has this really neat thing like, are we points in Hilbert space, right? Like, are we a point in a multidimensional space with multidimensional coordinates? And if that's the case, like obviously all humans that are similar should sort of cluster somewhere. And so that led to his sort of concept of quasi-species. And there is, so I just mentioned this because I think that there's a lot of compatibility between what your goals are and sort of what my motivation for cultural data analysis was and is. And one of the interesting things that's still missing is, or where there is, I think, progress to be made. You say, you know, your approach is like you have this kind of model, and then every one of the words you put in there is sort of can be subject of experiments, of validation, like where, like as Anders said, you can go after causality and stuff like that. But as an art historian, one of the interesting things is, you know, there's this famous book by Ernst Gombrich called Art and Illusion, which is basically like about the psychology of art without doing any experiments that a psychologist would do, but just observing all the examples we have from the past. And so very much in that sense, one key question would be, how many of the experiments you would love to do involuntarily already have been done? And if you look at the data hard enough, we can actually find out these kind of mechanisms, if they actually happen. How many people actually do copy? What is that? How many people just allude? How many people sort of rephrase? And you see what I mean? And do patterns actually become sharper, right? There's a really interesting thing, like in my own PhD, which looked at the depiction of ancient monuments and buildings and sculptures. One of the interesting things was that the figural goodness, this is how the English literature calls Gestalt, in essence, becomes better and better over time. Like, for example, a crumbly wall that is just like, you know, like shaded with a pencil will become thick lines. At some point it will be filled in by Sharpie. At some point it will become perfectly rectangular because somebody redraws it in the CAD program. But actually the irony is that the first sketch was closer to the original ruin than this neat looking figurally good rectangle of a wall, while the crickle crackle at the beginning is sort of family resemblant to the original much more. So you lose information while at the same time the figure becomes better. And so it seems like patterns become better in one way, in one sort of accuracy, like the accuracy of geometrical neatness, while they can become worse in terms of like family resemblance with the original that you actually intend to copy. And that thing is utterly looking like in biology, where you have variation and sort of, you know, like some error checks going on in essence, right? Which in computation, you have similar things going on, right? Like the error check is sort of like what preserves your computation in essence. And so the key question is, can we find data where all of your phenomena sort of, or at least part of your phenomena, are sort of testified and evidenced for? And ideally, we find something where, you know, it's not in your model yet, or things that function in a completely different way. And so in that sense, I think your picture can be one of the pictures we want to have on the wall as we go our ways and do our things in different ways within CUDAN, where, you know, at some point people will find something. So we can do this targeted, and the rest of the group can do this in a more diffuse way. We just should know that this exists, that there is cognitive feedback loops, there is perception action cycles going on, and there is obviously, you know, also some sort of external cognition going on, just like if the car crashes into the wall and then that leaves some trace, and then somebody else starts thinking about the shape of the wall. So, in that sense, I would like to, like my contribution to this discussion would be that I'm a very big friend of what you're doing there. And I find it actually very interesting how it is at the same time very, very similar, but you think about it in a completely different way than I do, because I typically look at data and see what's there, while you sort of have this, you build this hypothesis space, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, because you mentioned Piatica, and Pia's companion Mauri Kaipanen. He was working with these ontological spaces, and we did some work together. So basically, this thinking in the vectorial space mode is one that we did some years ago, but we did it in relation with affordances. So you can imagine that. So basically, we did such experiments that we asked of people like how certain specific tools, what they afford in one situation, and in another situation, what they feel that these tools afford. And we asked it like in a vectorial mode, so that it was like a binary, like zeros and ones. And we collected such bigger sets of data of how people perceive. So it was like a little vector space model of social media tools, and then we like every person could be positioned somewhere in this place, and you could be, your position was like changing when you did individual activity or collaborative activity, and you could also like see which people you could work with. So basically, this idea of looking it in a vectorial mode, I think it's in very many places. It's also in the flow theory, in the flow experiences. So what is a flow experiences? You go into the flow by lessening the cultural dimensions to very few. And when you are in the flow, you have a very few dimensions. You notice only some very particular parts of it, and then out of the flow, then you see too many dimensions. So there are a lot of like interesting thinking around that I really hope that CUDAN is lasting many, many years so that we can test out some of it.
Nice. Thank you very much. I think we should change topic. If there is no more questions regarding this, so we have another half of the seminar. Is there any remaining question for Kai? Nice. Okay, thank you very much. This is great. Then let's continue with the next contributor is Nikita Bukhanov. He has 7 slides for us. We're all very looking forward to that.
That's great. Thank you very much. Let me start demonstration. You now can see the slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my name is Nikita, and thanks to that open seminars, I start to consider myself a CUDAN evangelist. So thank you very much. It's very interesting for me to hear different presentations from scientists around the globe and have an opportunity to get your feedback. And I'm actually finishing my PhD in ITMO University in St. Petersburg. And it's called Cognitive Methods for Corporate Structures Mining to Support Digital Transformation in specific workflows, which is specific for oil and gas. And actually, it's quite interesting how your seminars, how the moods and culture of your seminars is actually different to the culture of seminars in my university. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today, about corporate culture. And what is it actually looks like? Is it a hierarchy which controlled purely by managerial decisions, or is it a complex mixture of personality, age, gender, nationality, and expertise? So that is actually the scope. And I think the picture from Marcos at several years ago quite nicely illustrates the idea and the difference between various corporate cultures. And so more formally, these are the questions for discussion. First of all, can we define a corporate culture as a humanities phenomenon, along with arts, music, history, journalism, and any other things which I think CUDAN is experiences in? The second point is can we actually quantify corporate culture through open and private data sources using network modeling and information theory? And last but not least is can we actually overcome the privacy issue and encourage participation of corporate employers in order to make the workplace culture better? And so here is just a brief literature overview I've made recently regarding this topic. I found actually a very nice article from Barabasi a couple of years ago, and it is all about investigation structures within US government. They actually look through open data and hyperlinks in the internet regarding all the agencies across US, and compare it with the real structure, which is actually by law has in each state, and they came to the idea that they correlate quite nicely. The second work in this space is actually investigation of team sizes, scientific team sizes, and how the size of the team actually influence on the impact which team can have in a long-term perspective. And the main conclusion of this work was that large teams tend to prolong the research which already been made before, and smaller teams tend to disrupt and create some new knowledge and push it forward afterwards. And the last work which I found relevant is from Mikhail Kosinski from Stanford. He is in charge of analysis of personal trails in social networks. And he actually claimed he can more precisely identify the personality type by posts in Facebook and any other social networks rather than psychological interview. And so I think that this paper shows that there is an opportunity to analyze a cultural things inside different domains, like in governments, in academia, in open space. But it's quite surprising for me that these methods are not published, or at least I didn't manage to find them in application to corporate cultures. And that's quite surprising for me, because in corporations, there are a lot of data which is suitable to the similar analysis, because there are a lot of text which is generated by employees. There are special photo banks inside companies. There are sometimes there are local TVs and even local social networks, but I don't know, maybe it's because of privacy issues or something else. There are no good, interesting papers about it. And further, I would like just to share a few slides regarding the results we've get from analysis of some sort of corporate culture and expertise for our clients. Here you can see the analysis of job descriptions. This is the requirement of Russian government that an employee in each company must describe their responsibilities in a special document. And we actually collect almost 1,000 documents of that sort and make an analysis how actually different functions can be delineated by its natural language descriptions. And you can actually see here 4 different functions with the word clouds. Well, obviously, this is Russian language. I do not know how much of you can read Russians. Russian, but well, trust me, these clouds are quite different. And afterwards, we actually created the network based on similarity of this description for each and every business processes inside company. And this gave us an opportunity to see the functional structure of the company by means of employees, employees, yes. And we found actually that this view is actually different from the modeling software, which is used by our experts to manually connect all the business processes. So one of the applications, the other is analysis of communication network, which was quite hard to make because obviously the communication, and we are talking here about email communications, is a private thing. And we were struggling to find a bunch of volunteers who actually donated us their email boxes. And here you can see how we tried to evaluate and estimate the culture inside project teams. So there is a special project for well log analysis, whatever, just a special project. And you can see the 2 stages here within 16 months and statistics for number of emails which were shared by the team and the size of emails. And there is a clearly a boundary between the communication activity. And when we were trying to analyze these results, we came to the conclusion that this part was actually the initial stage of the project. The team was new to each other, and they communicate massively using email. But afterwards, within a few months, they start to get know each other well, and they actually start to use software instruments like Overleaf for report generation, Slack for rapid communication, and GitLab repo for code. And so the intensity of communication is visually lowering down for the next part of the project. And the last but not least, and very popular approach is science of science, where we actually analyze the open data sets of published papers. And here you can see the largest connected component of co-authorship network for special industry journal for 2017. With colors represents the geographical location. And it's quite interesting to see that even we are talking just about Russia, this company doesn't have branches abroad, but it's clear to see the separation even within the scientific groups. So there is a huge cluster covering actually our capitals, Moscow, our main capital, and St. Petersburg, our cultural capital, and another cluster which covers actually the region further to the south, which where the most operational branches of the company situated. And so that is very brief, a background for the discussion. I think that it's still too close to call, but we can answer to all of these questions. Yes, we can. And that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
I'm muted, sorry. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's a nice overview. There's many topics that are dear to my heart, and obviously then also to CUDAN, I assume. So is there any questions from the audience? Like, what can we, thank you very much for contributing the examples.
I guess I should back to slides.
Yeah, maybe. So you gave some example. The work you've done so far is very, they're established streams, right? Like if you stay with the slides for a moment, there's obviously, this started with the famous Enron case of emails within Enron, which was a US corporation that sort of like self-combusted, and then it turned out that the corporate hierarchy was not the thing that determined what the company was doing, but the emails, but the hierarchy, so the corporate nodes, they wouldn't read the emails and so on. So one of the interesting things, now this is now 10 years into this kind of work, and so I do think the leftmost, the two left visualizations are a really interesting thing that should be discussed. There's a number of things we can do. Like we had discussions before where we said, oh, word clouds, I mean, they're quick to produce, but they don't tell you really a lot. It's also quite interesting that this work, as you can see it here, I don't know if everybody's familiar with Kosinski. Kosinski is the social scientist who sort of laid the foundational groundwork for Cambridge Analytica. He's not Cambridge Analytica. His way to put it was, I did not use the bomb, I just created the bomb, right? And so he does a lot of controversial papers. He had another one that was also very controversial. So that's one thing I would love to leave that aside right now, but this kind of depiction of how do we actually depict cultural interaction, in this case corporate culture, is sort of something interesting. In particular, if you look at the two left pictures, the leftmost is a picture you would find in a scientific paper, right? It's something that you can imagine in many, nice. You can imagine, you have seen in papers. The middle one is something you would find also in journal papers, but only in the topmost journals, because somebody did a lot of effort to actually come up with something that, if it's not explained to you, you cannot really read, right? So somebody made this thing, it's like, okay, this looks like a fern with a root, but what does it actually mean? So this is like, when I remember well, a Nature paper, right? In the middle.
Well, as far as I remember, it was a science paper.
Or a science paper, exactly.
Yeah, I think it was different colors covering the means of disruption and developments. So if we look into the paper, and supplementary, yeah, here.
Yeah.
So I think the idea was that basically this center dot is a paper itself, and the roots represent the former papers which was cited by this paper, and the leaves is actually papers which were published further after the reference paper. And if it's black, as far as I understood, it means that it actually develops the same ideas which was in roots. And if it's green, it actually means that this reference paper start to some new approach.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm after is the following. So you can see that this particular figure is sort of a creative product, right? That is sort of using creative aesthetics in order to make analysis sort of better, right? So one of the interesting things is, like, obviously you said you do this kind of work, which is sort of more mainstream. How would you see this combination? Like, how do you practice this on a day-to-day basis? So how would your work look like? Is it something you do with, you engage in computational science, but then, like, how do you think about drawing such figures? I appreciate a lot that you show them as examples, and so it's quite interesting to get that from outside, because that's sort of something I try to nurture, is to actually go into the direction of saying, okay, there's figures which may be hard to read, but once you explain them, they're super clear and easy to understand. In this case, cited papers versus citing papers. And you can see there is a whole, if you look at the paper you've just showed, there's a whole zoology going on of how papers can look like. This, by the way, is actually, I think the visualization is done by Mauro Martino, who's a colleague of mine. Yeah. So this is a really interesting, right?
Yeah, I can just shortly comment on that. As you asked, is it possible or is it actually meaningful to add an aesthetics to the result of computational analysis? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question because for us, as we're doing that sort of analysis for the industrial partner, we are actually quite narrowed to be able to not only make some aesthetics, but also to show the value of each and every research we do. But that is basically the drawback and in some points advances of working for industrial clients. But it's very interesting. I think if we not only look into that analysis as some applied tools, but if we look at this as a corporate culture approach. So if we're talking about a corporate culture, then adding an aesthetics to the data does have a meaning. And it does have a meaning for employees, because even in engineering environments, you know, like people go to work every day and they do some research and development tasks, but they also a human being with their personality. And I can say that in industry there is a demand for such employees to understand their own culture. And if the data analytics of their digital trails would have some aesthetics to that, that would be faced very interestingly, I guess. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me open the discussion to everybody else. So this is something which is also something that we are constantly confronted as cultural analysts. Is our work something that should be a business case, or should it be something that actually is more than that? And in order to spark the discussion maybe a little bit, this figure we just saw from that paper that looked like plants is a paper that is done by Dashun Wang and a guy called Evans, and it's coming out of a business school. It's people who do science of science, and there is people who pay a lot of money for that kind of stuff. So one can obviously not make this kind of argument that it either should look nice or it is actually for a corporate cause. So the question is, what is that kind of like, how do we actually sell cultural analysis while, you know, why should this be aesthetic? You think is this more only aesthetic looking so it can make it to Science magazine, or do we learn something from that we couldn't learn from a basic plot in R or something like that? Like whatever I think you used R given the gray background of your plot. So maybe some people have opinions regarding this. The question is, how do we get away with aesthetic plots, and should we do aesthetic plots and basically still make a case that what we do is valuable and should be funded? Not only like valuable in a sense of can we create business, but in a sense of like, is this what we want to do? Why do we want to do this? Other than the satisfaction. Yes, the plot looks nice. Viyunen.
Well, I feel that most of these plots that are visually pleasing, or I mean, the biggest use I see for them is really to spread your research results and for that community and social impact of your research. Like in the past research that we've done with the team in Australia on cinema industries, we would often work with artists to kind of make the results more appealing, or let's say illustrate the path of how a film, you know, moves around the world by drawing an olive tree with different olives and different branches and drawing it in watercolor, for instance. And only that way, that plot would be then understandable to the Greek community that was watching those movies back in the day. Well, that was like a Greek project. But in this as well, I think it's much more understandable for a wider public who then don't have to know, you know, what each numerical value means. So I feel for that, that's quite useful.
I would also vouch for the educational value of it, so on, and so the popular side. So like one of the beauties of this competitive and so statistical approach I see is that you condense all of this information, and it's something that people wouldn't, like lay people especially, they wouldn't just read, or people from other fields, they wouldn't have time or the passion to read it through. So how do you compress it in such a format that you give not full, but like maximum amount of information with this kind of minimal effort? So of course I would say that you should have like more detailed way of visualizing it, that more you know how to read it, and then there's this really approachable and aesthetic way.
There is an interesting correlation with understanding as comprehension, right? So compression, like having, that's like the classic, you know, sort of goal of physics, for example, is to describe the world with as short a formula as possible, which you compress the world into like E is mc square or something like that, or the Schrödinger equation. And so in a similar way, if you can fold everything into a figure that folds up, you know, it gives you sort of this concentrated insight, that is sort of something which is also important. So the interesting thing is there's two things that meet, like what Viuna said. I think that's totally a thing. Like at these journals particularly, you want to actually have broad audience impact. In order, that's one reason you want to make it look nice. But at the same time, what Mark said is also true. You want to compress whatever you know you show, because that is actually sort of in an aesthetic way as much understanding as writing the formula is understanding, if you can make your figure bullshit free, which in this particular case, you can probably have a debate about. And so that means at some point, if you want to mix these two missions, you can probably not call in the artist, which in this case, there was an artist called in. But if you call in the artist who's not a researcher, who's not interested, who's, you know, has different goals, it may be, I want to do aesthetic product, maybe I want to send a different message, then that doesn't feed fully into your research. So the ideal is sort of to mix the two in sort of some interesting way. And then there is a third issue, which I think that also needs to be put on the table, which is that it is highly satisfying if you can actually produce a picture that is meaningful and can fold in your thing like that. Yes?
Well, I think sometimes depending on the way you draw it, even the aestheticization can reveal details that you have not seen before. It's like swapping between different visualizations, different types of visualizing, and then adding that artistic dimension where some values maybe are reimagined in this now artistic form, then that can unveil some new values or new meanings to your data as well.
It's a discovery, basically. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I also think that it's like a metaphor that comes out when you visualize it differently. That you can use these, for example, these plants may show very important strategies that you would not see other ways. And these strategies then can help you to use some analogy that is in some totally other domains, and you can like associate your data with other domains. It's like I think that this particularly, I very much like these plants that came out, and the same thing as has been done very often with biology, that we see that underneath of everything in nature there are certain kind of patterns, and then these patterns are applicable in different domains like economy and culture and so on. So maybe this specific paper reveals something very important. And of course, this pattern that is revealed can be used in other domains, and therefore it's important.
Nice. Thank you very much. We collected a lot of interesting things. Like, we do it for our own pleasure because it spreads impact, because it condenses the information, it aids discovery, and you have a metaphor that you produce. Mila.
Yes, thank you. I have, for some reason, very unstable connection now, so I keep dropping out. So I apologize if something that I say has been already said.
No, but what you say right now, it does not arrive at us, if you can hear that. Oh, okay. Maybe you should try it again. Okay, it's really lost connection. Okay, we're gonna. Okay, I ask her to reconnect, and then basically we will not forget her. Who else? So yeah, thank you. There's yes. Sorry.
I had a question.
Yes.
Nikita, following what you said at some point, do you have any idea of the way your study or the studies you mentioned are indeed used by corporations when they are works for corporations?
Yes, thank you very much. That actually the main goal of my thesis. So my task is actually to create partial models of digital twin of employees, which I showed you as a communication networks, as a job descriptions and science of science. But the main idea of thesis is actually to make these digital twin models work for the efficiency of business processes. And we actually create the connections of different models and make it in a sort of a chain, and we call it value chain. So this is a chain of processes. Because we are talking about the industrial company, it starts with getting some raw materials and then produce them, transport them, and sell them on the market. And at each and every business process, there are some digital twin models of employees which help to make the whole role more efficient. But of course, it's quite far from the cultural things. And this is again a drawback of industrial applications. But we found that this approach is more suitable because it actually based on people who are in charge of all these business processes in fact. So if we make analytics on the digital trails of certain employees, we may have a better understanding of the impact of any sort of transformation within these processes.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's too early on as you have not finished your PhD, if I understand well. But if we take the example of your analysis of email inside a team, I mean, I can imagine what kind of use a corporation would do of it, but do you know if they already indeed used this analysis or similar analysis, and could you give an idea of concrete applications of this kind of work? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. That's why I'm here, to share ideas. And actually, one of the idea regarding the communication network of email is process mining from the event logs. So basically the communication within an email can be seen as some sort of event, which is logging through time. And there are a bunch of special methods which can create a specific process out of communication history. So let's say, hopefully in upcoming half a year, the pandemic will be over and we will be again able to go to business trips. And basically to order business trips, you need to write an email and get some feedback and write an email again, etc., etc. And if we have a collection of that sort of emails to the travel agency, there are methods of process mining which can create a full structure of how the process of business trip accommodation actually looks like in your company based on event logs. So this possibly one of the most applicable way of email analysis.
Sorry, I guess in the case of email, one of the goals would be to help employees to gain time, because I think the emailing with travel agencies are a good example, because in my university, we spend, in my mind, really too much time exchanging about something. When we do it personally, it's very fast. You go on the website, you do the booking, and it's done. Whereas currently in my university, it takes a lot of time, and there are a lot of intermediaries, and it happens quite often that the booking is not satisfactory as if I had been able to do it by myself. So is this kind of directions they are exploiting?
So
yeah, exactly.
Maybe I can cut in. So there's a whole discipline called science of science, and there's also a whole discipline called computational social science, and their overlap is exactly where this is going on. So there is work at MIT Media Lab by Sandy Pentland, which was foundational for this, and at Northwestern University, where also this other paper came out, which is there's Moshe Contractor, who's looking at, how do people send to Mars, which is actually work with Russia. Who do you send to Mars? And then all of a sudden it becomes a cultural question, and it's sort of relevant for us because it's not engineers you send to Mars. You have to send humans, and humans have a culture and have cultural needs. And so obviously this could be applied, as you, Nikita, sort of outlined. On the one hand, you can ask the question, is corporate culture, should be treated like a humanistic interaction, like music and art and so on? I think that is a very interesting way to look at things. On the other hand, obviously you can ask the simple question, can we actually look at cultural industries like this? And so obviously the key core question about this is, that is the critique of this type of computational social science. Do you want to be tracked all the time, right? And so the key thing is typically that kind of research is something people are, very reluctant to engage in, while at the same time everybody's like locked into their iPhone and Siri tracks them fully, and that's what Apple also does. So the key thing is, it's important to look, where does it already happen? So thank you very much for this excursion, sort of. We got two things out of this, which is, one is the figures issue, and the other thing is getting a glimpse into the kind of science of science, computational social science research. I would like to change topic again, one last time, and then maybe, open the field to questions that are not involving like, oh, there are slides and let's discuss, but maybe there is some general questions we want to get into. And I think this is this is exactly one of these moments. It's hard to actually sort of spark these kind of things, but I would like to give people in the audience the opportunity to basically contribute something, as we had Mila cutting out and we promised her not to forget her in the chat. I asked her to unmute and either continue what we were just talking about or come up with something completely new.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope this connection will last now. I actually I had, if I may, to kind of like continue with one more question to Nikita, as I was very happy that somebody is doing, like, in a way, how I see, like, cultural analytics of corporate cultures, because I'm cultural historian, and I did my PhD on Soviet corporate cultures, because I think that that everything that people do is culture, and in that sense also kind of like what people do in corporations and all kinds of like economic activities are strongly part of culture. So I think I was very happy to learn that that this is what you do. And I think that how I see kind of like what is really interesting in corporate cultures particularly is that kind of or what I see kind of like what is interesting to me there is that trying to somehow look at the practices, the ways of doing things within the corporations, and how these practices have been changing. Of course, as for me as cultural historian, the ways of doing things, the ways of, for instance, selling or doing business, and how all these practices have been changing is kind of like really interesting, especially if we are able to look at it in global scale. And I think that it's really interesting to look at and try to think how we are able to look at these practices through data, kind of like if we have, for instance, the email correspondence or certain kinds of reports, how do we actually extract the practices from the data? Kind of like what kinds of ways of doing things, different kinds of data actually represent, and how can we quantify those practices from the data? So so I was kind of like curious to ask Nikita, so how have you been thinking of how, for instance, this email correspondence, what different kinds of practices it may kind of like reflect? I think it was really interesting that you showed that there is the one point where this group started to kind of like another phase of their activities, and they also started to use other means of communication like Slack and GitHub and all kind of like these kinds of, so it's kind of like visible in that data. But are there some like you had this I think that you had these reports of the employees, so have you been thinking of so as they report their duties, but is there something else also behind there? Like I'm just curious to know what kinds of thoughts you have on this.
Yes, thank you very much. You actually explained the idea behind my thesis even better than I did. So thank you very much for that. And I think I could show you a few slides from the manuscript if that would be okay. Max, can I show the screen again? Thank you. Okay, so one of the examples you are talking about actually covers, let me find this picture, not here, and not here, and it's here. So when we're dealing with job descriptions, we actually manage to create that sort of structures which represent a company in a functional way. So this structure is actually the different business processes connected to each other based on how employees describe their functions in natural languages. And one way to actually measure the process and workflows which is in charge within a company is to extract different paths from that graph, which we do. For instance, over here, you can see.
So what are the nodes and what are the links?
Okay, yeah. So nodes here in this particular graphs are the particular business processes. So these business processes are described within a company. They have a special number, they have a name, and they represent some certain procedure. And the link is actually the semantic similarity within these business processes. So we gather the natural language descriptions of each and every business process and then measure the similarity. And so we end up with a network and we extract the shortest path between different nodes. And that's how we actually can represent the some workflow which is implemented inside the company, and we actually compare the workflow which we extracted from data of employees and workflow which is hard-coded in our standards and documents. And that's the idea, to compare how companies should behave and how it actually behaves based on analysis of employees' data.
So between the workflow that you deduce from the communication and the actual workflow.
That's correct. Yeah, that's it's pretty much like Barabasi did, as far as I understood, with within his U.S. state analysis, because he actually managed to extract all the hyperlinks from the internet to create a structure of agencies, and he also made the structure itself from the document as it should be on paper, and then he compared, and it was matching primarily. But in our sort of analysis, we're actually looking for places where they have not match, because it actually shows us the example where people actually behave differently of how they should do according to the documents. And that possibly a source of transformation and gaining efficiency.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Samila.
Yes, I'm still here, dropping out in and out, but I am kind of like hearing almost everything. I'm just kind of like, I stopped the video because I think that might affect a little bit. Yeah.
So the question is if you answered your question. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Sylvie raised her hand.
Thank you very much. So maybe Yuri Metz wants to talk. Who are you? Sylvie raised the hand. Okay, Sylvie. You're unmuted. No?
Yes, okay. Once again, I'm curious about, are you working only because you showed new parts of your work? And I am unclear whether you work only on material already existing, and then asking for, I guess, the people, if they agree, the agreement of people for using their data, or do you also work, do your observations while people are working, and people know when you work on their practices that you are observing them. And yes, so first the question. You didn't understand? Yes.
So the question is, yeah.
Let me just rephrase, or Max, if you would, I will be appreciated.
Okay, so the idea is if you are looking at data while the observed do not know they are observed, or are you observing employees that know that they are observed?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's actually the privacy issue, and it also arises when we are analyzing social networks, I guess. In our case, in corporate environments, we have different situations. For instance, when we analyze in job descriptions, we're doing it pretty much on a, how to say that, on a full managerial support. So we actually asked an assess for all job descriptions through HR department, and they gain us that access. And so we analyze the working procedures, and we do it without a formal consent of employees, because it doesn't require, it doesn't contain any personal data. It only business processes, description of job functionalities, etc. But another situation is when we are trying to analyze, as I showed, the communication networks, which is much more complex issue. And for instance, the slide I showed to you was actually my email box. I was the first volunteer to participate in this project. And I hope I will not be the last. But I actually managed to actually download all my email, meta information and text, and to see that sort of analysis. And I also thinking about to see how actually COVID pandemic influence the email activity inside company. But there is a strict legal issues, and we can analyze data only if we have a consent from a volunteer.
Thank you very much for these precisions. It was really interesting, although it was not exactly my question. My question was, I try to be more simple. Do people know you are going to use their data? I guess you're not your only example, your studies. So do people know you are going to use their data when they write? Or did it happen afterwards? They had email exchanges, and then later on you use data and then ask them for their consent. Because why do I ask this question? Because obviously it raises the question on the observer's influence. If you know you are observed, maybe you're not going, especially in a corporate context, you might not be exactly the same things as if you think you are not observed.
Yeah.
So how do you affect your data?
Yeah. As far as I understood you for now, the question is actually about the, is that analysis we are doing in real time or afterwards when we have enough data? Well, yeah, we do it retrospectively. So only after we have a consent from volunteer, he actually define the time period time period for downloading the information. He defined actually all the necessary metadata. He decided whether he give us a text or not. And only afterward, they analyze this data. It's not real time. And I think because of that, because this analysis is retrospective, is much more closer to cultural analysis, because we are not doing some rapid decisions based on that, but we are just looking about how actually the corporation was evolving and what was happening and how different employees behave and what are their profiles inside company, etc.
So thank you very much. I would like to extend this. This is actually great because it feeds into a central issue of cultural analysis, which is, as an art historian, right? You look at art history, you can do Renaissance, Baroque art history. And yes, art history sort of is around arguably since either Pliny or Vasari, like, you know, either the antiquity or 1560, say, but, you know, in a sense, artists become gradually more aware that they're the subject of art history and that they're classified into styles in particular since about the late 19th century. So since the late 19th century, every artist has tried to define a style or their own style, which leads to a sort of gazillion of isms, right? Like impressionism and symbolism and tachism and abstractionism and whatever. But obviously, we live in a completely different world. From the moment onward, art history becomes an academic discipline. Like from 1870 onwards, once you get professors for art history and art critics, the artists sort of like are in this constant feedback loop of self-classifying themselves and like trying to sort of come up with something completely new. And that is something which, you know, that is one area where this happens. The same thing happens in music, of course, and of course you could say there's always some observation. But still, I think right now, you can actually take a look at social media, for example. What does it actually mean if you think you are observed? People know they are analyzed in their kind of social media use, for example, right? Like where the surprising thing is, why does Rudy Giuliani nevertheless like let himself get caught by Sacha Baron Cohen in some compromising situation where he was like, yeah, totally, he would assume that he will be filmed in that kind of circumstance, right? And so the kind of key issue is there any situation where people are not observed or have the illusion of not being observed and have a behavior that's different from behaving while being observed, in essence, right? So one of the key questions is like, this ambiguity, this is something which should be done in your case, but it should also be done in any kind of cultural data analysis. We always have to ask, how much is the data influenced by ourselves, like sort of being the thermometer? Like how large is the thermometer? Obviously, if the thermometer is the size of the pot with the water you want to measure, once you put the thermometer in, the water is already warmer because you have a warm thermometer or something, right? And so that is something which I think is a crucial issue and should be discussed or kept in mind as we go on, right? So that's, by the way, Sylvie, in the demo series project, I think there's a huge issue, right? Because you got the intelligence community involved in producing the TV series, while the TV series sort of like has arguably sort of closer contact to them than to the audience, while the audience looks at the TV series as some sort of like fiction, which, you know, that's a really interesting kind of conundrum. So one may extend the question to you, how do you actually deal with this? Like, how do you solve the conundrum that there is all these influences and there is really no neutral observation going on from your side at some point?
I'm not sure I'm able to answer. I think Pauline, but I guess she wasn't there because
she was partially there,
he's taking care of the second work package, which is the one which really interacts with the intelligence community, and I really need to reflect on your question. But my first reaction would be maybe that for us it's not really a problem because it's all topic, actually, the way there are interactions. I mean, we are not pretending to observe something which would be on one side intelligence community, on the other side TV shows. The preconception, even for Pauline, of the idea of TV series, of security TV shows, is that they are built with the collaboration of the intelligence security. And she, among our exchanges, she explained, because she did her PhD on the topic, that it was really interesting for her because she had the opportunity to discuss with spies, actually, and they told her that at least several of them told her that they felt they were very happy that these security shows existed because they could they recognize themselves in the shows. So they are spies. So we don't know if it's true, of course. But what they told her is that they recognized themselves in the shows, and it was the way for them to explain to their family the kind of work they do without being too precise on what exactly they do. But so my first answer would be, it's not a problem for us really, because it's the topic of the project, a huge part of the topic. And actually I might add, I don't know if you know about it, but I watched a few months ago a documentary on Vladimir Putin, and actually he decided on becoming an agent and working on KGB to begin with, because he watched TV shows or maybe film spy movies, and he was a huge fan of a specific spy movie. So I mean, it allows me to react on something you said before, Max, when you talked about Mars, because I am a huge I'm a science fiction fan. So one of the goals for humanity in my mind is that we would be able to go into space, and I always thought that to help. So I would be happy if we are able to go on Mars, and there is a huge influence of TV series and the choices of people make for their professions or for the kind of things they are interested in, or in political options. That's the topic of demo series. And I have always thought that we needed to, if we want to go on Mars, we might need to create a very good TV shows which happens on Mars and speaks about the colonization of Mars, and it might help the cause.
Yeah, thank you very much. So people are amused, but actually there's true reality in this reality show, right? This research of NASA with Russia was led by a North contractor at Northwestern, is doing exactly that. They basically took the model of a Big Brother. They put people in a box that is completely hermetically sealed, and then they have like 25 different groups going on, like only men, only women, young and old, people who are fertile, people who are not fertile anymore, and stuff like that. And they just try out what works out best psychologically. And there is also leading people in that kind of entrepreneur venture crowd, like Esther Dyson thinks that will finance the Mars mission, will be the reality TV series, which, critics would say is the same as having sort of a circus in the Roman Empire, because it's pretty sure that about 90% of the people will die and they'll never come back. So that, I think, yes. So in some sense, your private utopia of this is at the same time very much in the forefront of the solution, but also a cultural question, and a question of cultural analysis in a sense, right? We got like 6 minutes left, and so the most obvious question today is, should we do this again? This is an experiment, and so my goal is to bring in speakers that are inspiring and do things from a variety of perspectives, selected by the team, selected by me over time to basically flesh out the profile. We are a little bit like a beech tree leaf. We're just the veins, every one of us, but then there's sort of the meat of the leaf is other people in other places who give a big picture together. But then this thing, if you should intersperse this with these kind of sessions where there is no speaker, that's a question we have, right? So that's maybe we should just do a final round, like what people think about like doing this and what can be done better in essence, if that makes sense. So maybe people want to speak who didn't say anything. So should we do this again? Should we vote or?
I would say yes, but it's good not to get too stuck on any specific topics, because I see one of the outcomes as we find problematics and delineate, common grounds and so on. And it's a good chance to go through some, main concepts or topics, or like even that, like I got to the idea, there's no time to discuss such a thing. It's like a little bit smaller than meaning of life, but what is meaning of culture, right? And so what is meaning of culture, like CUDAN sense, because we had a good example of, you have organizatory culture, and then you have this cognitive science from Guy's side, and so you could have this interesting big discussions actually going on.
So yeah, thank you very much. I think there's an interesting thing, like if you have speakers who worked a long time, like Peter last week, you get like sort of a summary of the last 5 years of work, of a body of work that lasts for 20 years. Obviously, this is very dense. And then obviously, how do we create that kind of density? Like, right, obviously, if you go one topic and another, and you split it up, it becomes sort of more interesting for some subgroup than for another subgroup. So the question is, and our challenge is, if you do this next time, how do we create this kind of density? Like, should we have themes, like goalposts, where we say every 15 minutes we switch topics and we walk in with 8 topics to fill the 2 hours? Or so that's a kind of key question. Should it be lightning talks for everybody or something like that? So we're very open to suggestions. Let me leave it at that. So please send whatever you think. There is still one thing in the chat. Yeah, no, that's okay. And so other than that, I thank you very much for attending this. And I would just say, let's close the session. And let's meet the next time we have a speaker. Thank you very much. Oh, one thing, is it next week already? Yes, next week. Yuna, you want to introduce the ERC thing? That's next week, right? Yes. Yes.
Which thing? Oh,
So next week we will not do a CUDAN Open Lab seminar.
I can't really introduce it.
I can do it, I can do it.
If you can.
So Yuna and I have a special interest, which we think we should especially encourage you to be especially interested too, which is the ERC, the European Research Council, does a day-long symposium regarding the role of gender and, sort of nurturing gender equality in science and research. And there is a lot of interesting speakers going on. And so one thing was like, Yuna said like, oh, I'm not going to be able to attend the 2 hours. And I was like, yeah, actually, I registered for this event before we even had the CUDAN Open Lab seminar, because I was a panelist. And then we had the idea, let's bring Deb Verhoeven, who is the PhD advisor of Yuna, who would be a very fitting cultural analyst regarding that topic on the same day or the day later. But then actually this fizzled, and this will happen in spring. So next week, we're gonna encourage you to actually attend that ERC meeting on gender. And so we can send it around. So in 2 weeks, thank you very much.